Long before the war that would make it famous, the Springfield rifle was born from humiliation. In 1898, during the Spanish-American War, U.S. troops armed with single-shot and outdated Krag rifles faced Spanish soldiers carrying German-made Mauser Model 1893s. The Mauser's flat trajectory, fast bolt action, and clip-fed magazine outclassed every rifle in American hands. When the smoke cleared, the U.S. Army's Ordnance Department knew it had been defeated, not just on the battlefield, but in technology. America needed a new rifle, something that could equal or surpass Europe's finest. In 1900, at the Springfield Armory in Massachusetts, teams of engineers began work on a design that would combine the Mauser's efficiency with American craftsmanship. They borrowed what worked: the rotating bolt, the internal magazine, the controlled feed extractor, and refined what didn't. After 3 years of prototypes and testing, the result emerged: the U.S. rifle caliber .30, model of 1903, or simply the Springfield M1903. It was elegant in its simplicity, deadly in its precision. With a 24-inch barrel, a 5-round internal magazine, and a crisp 2-stage trigger, it could place bullet after bullet in the same circle at 600 yards. The rifle was machined to tolerances unheard of for its time. The receiver was forged from high-grade steel, polished smooth, and finished in deep parkerized gray. The walnut stock fit like a tailor-made suit. Even the iron sights, a finely adjustable ladder design, allowed for astonishing precision. Every part of it whispered reliability. But what truly made the Springfield exceptional was not just its mechanics, it was its ammunition. The Army paired it with a new cartridge, the .30-06 Springfield, introduced in 1906. This round fired a 150-grain bullet at 2,800 feet per second, faster and flatter than almost anything on the planet. At 800 yards, it still carried lethal energy. At 1,000, it could pierce helmets and wood. Soldiers quickly learned that if you could see it, you could hit it. The combination of rifle and cartridge gave the U.S. its first true precision weapon. When America entered World War I in 1917, the M1903 went to war. In the mud of the Argonne and the forests of the Marne, Marines and Army sharpshooters used it to deadly effect. German soldiers came to fear the long, sharp crack of the Springfield, a single report followed by silence, then another, steady and patient. It was not a machine gun's roar, but the heartbeat of a rifleman who never missed. At Belleau Wood, Marine snipers armed with early scoped Springfields picked off machine gun crews from 700 yards away, forcing entire German positions to withdraw. The rifle proved so accurate that even the German command noted it in captured reports. One officer wrote, "The Americans' rifle fire is uncommonly precise. It exceeds our expectation at long distance." When the armistice came, the Springfield returned home crowned with reputation. But time was moving fast. The interwar years brought new philosophies of warfare. Tanks, aircraft, and automatic weapons were changing how battles would be fought. To many in the Army, the Springfield seemed a relic, too slow, too deliberate. Yet, in the hands of a skilled marksman, it remained unmatched. In the 1920s and 1930s, it became the rifle of choice for competition shooters at Camp Perry and for Marine Corps marksmanship training. The U.S. Navy and Army developed improved peep sights, match-grade barrels, and lighter triggers. The rifle that had once been a soldier's standard tool evolved into an instrument of art. Inside the walls of the Springfield Armory, engineers continued to refine it. They shortened the stock, adjusted the rear sight base, and improved the heat treatment of the steel receiver after early cracking incidents. By 1930, the M1903 had matured into one of the finest bolt-action rifles ever built. It was not cheap. It took nearly 80 man-hours to produce each one, but it was flawless. For America's elite marksmen, it became more than a weapon. It was an extension of their skill. By the late 1930s, as war clouds gathered once again over Europe, the Springfield was no longer America's primary battle rifle. That role was being taken by the semi-automatic M1 Garand. But for one special group of soldiers, the old bolt action was irreplaceable. The Army and Marine Corps began quietly selecting men with steady hands and sharp eyes, men who could wait for hours, breathe with the wind, and strike with a single shot. These were the new snipers, and their weapon of choice was still the M1903. The Ordnance Department began modifying rifles for these sharpshooters. They hand-selected barrels with perfect rifling, adjusted triggers for smooth pull, and mounted low-power scopes, 2.5 and 4x, optics that allowed clear aiming at hundreds of yards. The result was the birth of a new variant, the M1903A4, America's dedicated sniper rifle. While the rest of the world raced toward rapid-fire weapons, the U.S. quietly armed a few men with the opposite, precision. By 1939, war had already returned to Europe. Reports of German snipers in Poland and France reminded every army that one man with a rifle could dominate a battlefield. The U.S. wasn't yet at war, but the lessons were clear. In the quiet ranges of Quantico and Camp Lejeune, American sharpshooters practiced with their Springfields, learning windage, drop, and patience. Each man learned that at 800 yards, almost a half-mile, the .30-06 still flew flat and true, faster than sound, capable of striking before the echo reached the ear. They didn't know it yet, but in just a few years, their rifles would return to Europe, and when they did, even the Germans, masters of the Mauser, would write in disbelief about invisible riflemen who could hit from distances no one thought possible. The rifle born from defeat in 1898 was about to give its final devastating lesson, that precision, in the right hands, could change the course of war. When America entered World War II in December 1941, the M1903 Springfield had already been serving soldiers for nearly 4 decades. It was a veteran rifle, reliable, familiar, and proven, but the battlefield it was about to face had changed. Across Europe and the Pacific, warfare had evolved into something faster and deadlier. Tanks roamed the fields, aircraft ruled the skies, and submachine guns chattered in every alley. Yet in this chaos, there remained a quiet kind of war, one fought between men who rarely saw one another, where patience and precision were the only currency that mattered: the sniper's war. At the start of the conflict, America had no standard-issue sniper rifle. The few scoped M1903s from World War I had long since been scrapped or stored away. The Army and Marine Corps had excellent marksmen, Olympic shooters, hunters, competitive riflemen, but their rifles lacked optics. As reports came in from Europe describing German and Soviet snipers dominating from hidden positions, the U.S. realized it needed its own long-range weapon, and quickly. In early 1942, the Ordnance Department at Springfield Armory began modifying existing M1903A3 rifles to create a purpose-built sniper version. They stripped the iron sights, tapped the receivers for scope mounts, and fitted them with a new optic, the M73B1 scope, a 2.5 times power sight made by Weaver. The modification required lowering the bolt handle and offsetting the scope slightly to the left, allowing the rifle to eject spent casings cleanly. The final product was designated M1903A4, the first standardized sniper rifle in U.S. Army history. It was a simple conversion, but it worked. The 2.5 times scope wasn't powerful by modern standards, yet in trained hands it was lethal. A skilled marksman could spot, estimate range, and hit targets at 600 to 800 yards, roughly half a mile, with remarkable consistency. The combination of the rifle's inherent accuracy and the flat trajectory of the .30-06 round gave American sharpshooters the ability to strike unseen and unheard. Training began immediately. At Camp Perry in Ohio and Camp Blanding in Florida, instructors drilled soldiers in the ancient art of patience. They learned to breathe with their trigger finger, to let the crosshairs float and settle on the exhale. They studied wind, mirage, and even the shimmer of heat above the barrel. Range cards were filled with scribbled notes. 200 yard, 0. 400, 2 clicks up. 800, 8 clicks. Crosswind 5 miles per hour, hold 1 reticle left. To these men, mathematics and instinct became the same thing. Marine Corps snipers trained at Camp Lejeune and Quantico, refining their field craft to perfection. Their instructors were veterans of interwar shooting competitions, men who could read wind by the sway of grass or the movement of a flag. A good sniper, one gunnery sergeant told his students, isn't the one who shoots first, it's the one who doesn't need to shoot twice. In Springfield's workshops, engineers hand-selected barrels with the tightest tolerances. Each trigger was polished until it broke like glass. No slack, no drag. The scopes were carefully zeroed, though imperfect. The weaver's reticle wasn't illuminated, its magnification modest, its field of view narrow. But the rifle itself, smooth, balanced, and powerful, made up for every shortcoming. When test-fired, most could group 5 rounds inside a 6-inch circle at 600 yards, roughly half a mile. For wartime production, that was near perfection. The .30-06 cartridge was the secret ingredient. At 2,800 feet per second, its bullet flew flat for over 500 yards before beginning to drop significantly. Even at half a mile, it retained enough energy to penetrate a German steel helmet or an oak fence post. To the sniper behind the scope, this meant the rifle could speak first and stay silent second. The target would fall before the sound arrived. As shipments of the M1903A4 reached units in 1943, soldiers reacted with mixed emotions. Some found the scope fragile or dim in low light. Others struggled with the awkward cheek weld caused by the offset mount. But those who learned its nuances became legends. In the hands of a patient man, it was a surgical tool, a weapon that erased distance. By mid-1943, specialized sniper schools were forming across the Army and Marines. Recruits learned camouflage, stalking, and observation. They built hides out of burlap, mud, and branches. They practiced moving across open terrain without a ripple of motion. The Springfield became not just a rifle, but an extension of the man's senses, his eyes, his nerves, his heartbeat. Each man was paired with a spotter, equipped with binoculars and a notebook. Together, they became a two-man organism. One watched the world, the other altered it. A good team could account for wind at 700 yards by watching leaves flutter 100 feet away. They learned to measure range not by instruments, but by memory, knowing that at 600 yards, a standing man filled the scope's vertical crosshair. At 800, he shrank to half. The training wasn't just physical, it was psychological. A sniper had to live in silence, wait for hours, and end a life with one heartbeat. "You have to learn when not to shoot," said Sergeant Nathan Ford, one of the early Army sharpshooters in Tunisia. "That's the hardest part. You don't win medals for the ones you let go, but those are the shots that keep you alive." Meanwhile, in Germany, reports began to surface about a strange phenomenon. American riflemen hitting at impossible distances. Wehrmacht intelligence intercepted after-action reports from Normandy and Italy describing unseen shooters killing officers, mortar crews, and even drivers through narrow slits in bunkers. One German unit near Anzio in early 1944 described them as unsichtbare Riflemen, which meant invisible riflemen. What the Germans couldn't know was that these weren't mysterious new weapons. They were old rifles reborn. The same Springfield that had fought in the trenches of the Great War now returned with glass eyes and deadlier precision. Each trigger pull was a lesson in engineering and patience. A 41-inch rifle balanced perfectly in the palm, firing a bullet whose path could slice through half a mile of air and still strike true. It didn't roar or chatter. It whispered, one shot at a time, writing its message across Europe in neat and fatal punctuation marks. By 1944, when American troops landed in Normandy, the M1903A4 was ready for its truest test. In the bocage, among the hedgerows and fields, the invisible rifleman would return. And for the first time, German snipers armed with Mausers would discover that the Americans could see just as far as they could shoot. The duel of eyes and rifles was about to begin. The hedgerows of Normandy were beautiful to look at and deadly to fight through. Centuries-old walls of earth and thorns separated every field, turning the countryside into a maze of green corridors. For infantrymen, each hedgerow was a trap, a curtain hiding machine guns, mortars, and the eyes of unseen snipers. When the Americans landed on D-Day and pushed inland, They entered a battlefield where the enemy could vanish into the landscape. But they brought with them men who had trained for just such a war, the Springfield snipers, patient, deliberate, and invisible in return. In the early weeks after the landings, the 29th and 1st Infantry Divisions began deploying their best shots forward. The M1903 A4 rifles, with their slender scopes and dark walnut stocks, glimmered in the summer light like hunting weapons. These snipers were told to do what they did best: find, fix, and eliminate the unseen. A sniper's work was not loud, nor fast, nor glorious. It was mostly waiting, endless stillness broken by a single decision. One of the first reports came from an orchard outside St-Lô. A German observation post had been directing artillery fire onto the American advance for days. At dawn, 2 riflemen, Private First Class Harold Conlon and his spotter, Corporal Abrams, crawled through wet grass until they reached a shallow ditch 700 yards from the hilltop post. Through his 2.5x scope, Conlon could just make out the glint of binoculars. He waited for the morning fog to lift. When the first shaft of sunlight struck the lens, he exhaled, pressed the trigger, and the binoculars dropped from view. One shot, one heartbeat. Silence. The shelling stopped. By noon, the Germans were calling them Geisterschützen, ghost shooters. The Springfield's long reach was its magic. Its .30-06 bullet, flying faster than sound, reached the target before the enemy even heard the report. At 800 yards, nearly half a mile, it still hit with the force of a hammer. The Germans, veterans of years of combat, were shocked. They had expected the Americans to fight up close, relying on mass and firepower. Instead, they found themselves stalked by riflemen who could strike from invisible ridgelines, through hedges, or from church towers a kilometer away. German after-action reports from July 1944 show a growing alarm. One entry from the 352nd Infantry Division noted, "The enemy employs riflemen who fire from concealed positions with great accuracy. Our forward observers and officers are frequently hit without sound or warning. They are invisible and do not betray their position by muzzle flash." That last part was no exaggeration. American snipers learned quickly how to hide their rifles. They wrapped the barrels in burlap and mud to mask reflections, covered their scopes with cloth when not in use, and fired from deep shadow where the flash was absorbed by earth and leaves. Some Marines in the Pacific had even taught the trick of shooting through foliage to obscure muzzle blast. Now the same method found its way to France. They didn't just shoot at random. Each mission had purpose. Snipers hunted enemy observers, radio operators, NCOs, and gunners. Every trigger pull was calculated to disrupt command and sow fear. One rifle, one man, could silence an entire platoon. The duel between American and German marksmen was as much psychological as physical. The Germans had their own skilled snipers, armed with 4x scoped Mauser K98K rifles. They were deadly, disciplined, and patient. But they underestimated the Springfield's flat trajectory and the Americans' fieldcraft. In one recorded encounter near Carentan, a German sniper pinned down a U.S. patrol for nearly an hour. He killed 2 men, wounding a third. Sergeant William Kearns, a 1903 A4 sniper from the 2nd Infantry Division, crawled through a drainage ditch to flank the position. He watched for movement through the leaves until he saw a small flash of glass, the glint of the enemy's scope. He adjusted for distance, 500 yards, slight wind from the left. He squeezed the trigger once. The German never fired again. Kearns marked the spot with a small cross on his rifle's stock, the 3rd that week. Word of such duels spread fast. To regular infantrymen, these snipers were half soldiers, half ghosts. They fought alone or in pairs, often unseen even by their own units. Some stayed in position for days, unmoving, watching the same hedgerow until a single figure appeared in the right place at the right time. The Springfield itself was almost silent in its operation. The bolt was smooth, the recoil gentle, the sound sharp and clean. When fired from concealment, it blended with machine gun bursts or artillery in the distance. Its reliability under all conditions was legendary. Rain, mud, or dust, it didn't matter. The rifle always fired. At night, when the front quieted, the snipers became the Army's eyes. Through their scopes, they scanned crossroads and tree lines for movement. In the dark, a careless cigarette or the glint of a helmet was enough to mark a target. The crack of a single Springfield shot in the blackness could turn an entire enemy unit's nerves to glass. In the autumn of 1944, as the U.S. Army advanced through the forests of the Hutgern and the ruins of Aachen, the Springfield's legend only grew. German officers began referring to long-range American riflemen in their situation reports. One captured lieutenant from the 3rd Parachute Division told his interrogators, "They shoot from nowhere. You cannot see them, only the man next to you falling. They do not waste bullets. Each one finds a man." This was the effect the Americans had trained for, not just killing, but shaping the battlefield through fear. Snipers forced the enemy to crawl instead of walk, to duck instead of lead. Every officer who stepped into the open knew there might be glass eyes watching from half a mile away. But behind every perfect shot was a man living in silence. Snipers carried more loneliness than glory. They ate from cold cans, slept under leaves, and measured time by light and wind. The M1903A4 became their only companion, its wood dark with oil, its scope fogged with breath in the early mornings. They learned to trust it as they trusted their heartbeat. Private Leo Harmon of the 4th Infantry wrote home from France, "I never see their faces, only the helmets when they stand too tall. The rifle does the rest. It feels like it knows what to do before I do." By winter, when the snows came and the hedgerows turned white, the Springfield's work continued from ruined farmhouses and tree lines. The Germans had their Mausers, but the Americans now matched them, shot for shot, distance for distance. And somewhere in the forests of Belgium and the fields of France, the phrase "invisible riflemen" appeared again in captured reports. It was no myth. It was the quiet proof of what Springfield engineering and American marksmanship could do together. The ability to reach across half a mile of battlefield and end a fight before it began. The Germans had built their war on machines of speed and steel. The Americans answered with patience, optics, and one man holding a rifle that could whisper death across the horizon. In Europe, the Springfield sniper ruled from hedgerows and ruins, but half a world away, on the islands of the Pacific, the same rifle fought a very different kind of war. There were no long, open fields, only jungles so thick that daylight vanished a few feet from the ground. Yet even here, where the air was heavy with salt and the soil slick with blood and rain, the M1903A4 found its voice. It spoke not with thunder, but with silence, one shot at a time, from shadows where no enemy expected it. The Pacific War was intimate, brutal, and personal. Every hill, every cave, every grove of palms was a battleground. The Japanese fought with fanatic devotion, hidden in spider holes or fortified bunkers, waiting for Americans to come close before unleashing fire. In such an environment, the sniper became not just a hunter, but a guardian, the unseen hand that kept his comrades alive. From Guadalcanal to Peleliu, Saipan, and Iwo Jima, Marine and Army marksmen carried the Springfield through heat and hell. They stripped their rifles bare, wrapping them in tape or burlap to protect the metal from salt air. The .30-06 cartridge, born in the cold workshops of Massachusetts, now hissed through tropical humidity, cutting through vines, bamboo, and volcanic dust with the same deadly precision. One of the first to make his name was Marine Sergeant Herbert McMillan, a tall, quiet Texan who had learned to hunt deer on open plains before the war. On Guadalcanal in 1942, McMillan crawled through mud to within 400 yards of a Japanese observation post. The enemy artillery had pinned down a company of Marines all morning. He waited for hours under a fern canopy, the sweat pouring down his neck. When the Japanese officer stepped into the clearing to adjust his field glasses, McMillan took the shot. one clean sound, one falling body, and the shelling stopped. The men cheered, but McMillan was already gone, crawling back into the trees with his Springfield against his chest. Stories like his spread fast. The Japanese began to fear what they couldn't see. Ghost riflemen, one captured soldier called them. They struck at sunrise and sunset, their bullets cutting down machine gun crews, officers, and sentries from distances the Japanese couldn't match. In the thick heat, the 30-06 round carried straight and true when lesser calibers bent and wavered. The snipers of the Pacific learned quickly that the jungle was not their enemy, it was their ally. They painted their faces with mud, sewed leaves onto their helmets, and built nests in banyan roots and coral ridges. They fired from shadows, never the same spot twice. The Springfield's bolt was so smooth and quiet that a well-trained man could cycle it without breaking his camouflage. The rifle didn't just shoot, it whispered. Marine snipers used patience as their deadliest weapon. On Bougainville, they would wait entire days for a single opportunity. Private Jack Fleming of the 3rd Marine Division wrote in his journal, "The jungle talks all day. Birds, insects, shells. You listen until the pattern changes. Then you know they're near. That's when the rifle wakes up." Even the scope's low magnification, once a complaint in Europe, became an advantage here. In the thick foliage, a wide field of view mattered more than power. A 2.5x optic let a sniper track movement in the undergrowth, spot glints of bayonets, or the shimmer of sweat on a soldier's neck. At Tarawa in 1943, where the beaches were choked with wreckage and death, Marine marksmen picked off Japanese defenders who fired from pillboxes hundreds of yards inland. The Springfield's accuracy turned the chaotic assault into a deadly chess match. Each time a muzzle flash blinked from a bunker, an American sniper found the line of fire and ended it. On the second day, a Marine captain wrote in his log, "Every time one of our boys fell, a rifle answered, from nowhere. The Japs call them ghosts. We call them angels." In Saipan, the M1903A4 became the eyes of the advancing Marines. Snipers positioned themselves high on the volcanic slopes of Mount Tapachau, scanning the cane fields below. Through the lenses of their scopes, they saw Japanese infantry moving along irrigation ditches, unaware that death watched from half a mile away. The first shots were clean and distant. The rest scattered into chaos. Within minutes, the attack faltered, undone by invisible hands. When the battle reached Iwo Jima, the M1903A4 faced its harshest test. The island was a wasteland of ash and stone, and every inch was covered by hidden guns. The Marines who landed there in February 1945 walked into a storm of fire unlike anything before. For snipers, there was no cover, only craters, wreckage, and smoke. Yet they adapted. They dug pits in the volcanic sand, covering themselves with blankets of soot and debris. Through their scopes, they hunted the small flashes of enemy rifles in the caves and bunkers. Private First Class Lee Hawk Dawson of the 5th Marine Division later recalled, "You couldn't see them. You just waited for the blink of a shot, a spark in the dark rock, and then you squeezed. If you saw nothing move, you knew you'd hit him." For every sniper, the Springfield became both weapon and lifeline. Its balance and recoil let them stay hidden after each shot. Its rugged design survived where humidity killed lesser rifles. They learned to clean it in the rain, oil it with whatever grease they could find, and shield the scope with pieces of tin or leather to keep out volcanic grit. Japanese forces, too, fielded snipers, some armed with 6.5mm Arsaka rifles equipped with 4x scopes. They were deadly marksmen, skilled at ambush and deception. But the Americans' training, combined with the Springfield's power, slowly turned the duel in their favor. The heavier 30-06 round gave a longer reach, and its impact through brush and bamboo was devastating. The psychological war grew intense. Every Japanese officer who raised binoculars, every machine gun crew that exposed itself for a second too long, risked instant death. At night, the Americans advanced with their snipers ahead, guiding them through whispers and hand signals. By morning, entire enemy outposts lay silent. By the end of the island campaigns, the Springfield had earned a reputation bordering on myth. Marines called it the voice in the trees. To the Japanese, it was the sound of inevitability. One distant shot that ended a fight before it began. In the jungles, there were no spectators, no glory, only patience, breath, and the weight of wood and steel against a soldier's cheek. Every trigger pull was a calculation. Distance, humidity, heart rate, gravity. The snipers became mathematicians of death, and the M1903A4 was their instrument. When the war finally neared its end in 1945 and the Pacific fell quiet except for the hum of insects, those who carried the Springfield knew they had witnessed something rare. The rifle had proven that even in a world of machines, planes, and bombs, one man, one bullet, and one steady hand could still change the tide of battle. From the hedgerows of France to the beaches of Iwo Jima, the story was the same. The whisper of the Springfield, the silence after the shot, and the disbelief of enemies who never saw where it came from.
When the war finally ended in 1945, the world was in ruins, but the legend of the Springfield rifle was just beginning. Across Europe and the Pacific, captured German and Japanese officers gave eerily similar testimony. Somewhere on every battlefield, they had been haunted by unseen marksmen, riflemen who could strike from impossible distances. The Germans had called them unsichtbare Gewehrmänner, invisible riflemen. The Japanese, with quiet fear, called them ghosts with steel eyes. In both cases, they were talking about one weapon, the Springfield M1903, and the men who had mastered it. For those who carried it, the M1903A4 had become more than a tool. It was a companion, a constant presence through months of mud, heat, and silence. Each man knew its weight, its feel, the rhythm of its bolt, the precise pull of its trigger. Every rifle had its own small imperfections, a stiff safety, a slightly crooked scope mount, a scar on the stock, and yet, in the hands of its owner, it was flawless. The bond between sniper and rifle was deeply personal, almost sacred. They didn't name their rifles the way bomber crews named their planes, but they treated them with the same reverence. After the war, many of these men struggled to explain what it had been like to fight not in bursts and explosions, but in long stretches of waiting, of breathing with the world, until the moment came to break it with one shot. The Springfield demanded patience and rewarded perfection. A man could spend 6 hours watching through his scope, make one decision, and walk away having changed the outcome of a battle. The rifle's technical legacy was just as lasting. Its .30-06 Springfield cartridge, already legendary, became the standard by which future ammunition would be judged. Ballistically, it was nearly ideal, flat shooting, powerful, and stable across temperature and altitude. Its recoil was manageable, its precision unmatched. Engineers would spend decades trying to design something better, but most modern sniper cartridges still trace their lineage to it. The M1903's bolt-action design also became the blueprint for generations of precision rifles. Its controlled feed extractor and smooth cycling inspired the post-war Remington 700, Winchester Model 70, and the Marine Corps' future M40 sniper rifle. Even the U.S. Army's M24 sniper system, used in conflicts from Vietnam to Afghanistan, owed much to the old Springfield spirit. Yet, the Springfield's greatness wasn't just in steel and ballistics. It was in what it taught soldiers, that in an age of mass production and mechanized death, individual skill still mattered. The rifle turned its wielder into a craftsman of war, patient, deliberate, responsible for every shot. The psychological impact of the Springfield was immense. On the battlefield, snipers wielded fear like artillery. The knowledge that death could come silently from half a mile away changed how enemies moved, communicated, even thought. Officers stopped standing upright. Runners zigzagged across roads. Entire units hesitated to show themselves. A single hidden rifle could hold down a company, not by firepower, but by terror. German reports from the Hurtgen forest in late 1944 described entire platoons pinned down by single precision shooters of extraordinary skill. Commanders begged for smokescreens to hide their movements. One officer wrote bitterly, "It is not the volume of fire that stops us. It is the thought of one bullet, the one that already has your name on it." That was the Springfield's true victory, not in numbers, but in minds. When the guns went quiet, thousands of Springfields came home with their owners. Some ended up in closets or gun racks. Others were rebarreled, rescoped, and used for hunting deer in the calm forests of post-war America. In quiet moments, those who had once lain in the mud with a Springfield found themselves again alone in nature, breathing, waiting, aiming, but this time at nothing more dangerous than a buck grazing at dawn. The rifle, once an instrument of death, had returned to the role it was born from, a hunter's companion. The U.S. military, too, kept the design alive. Though replaced by the semi-automatic M1 Garand for standard infantry use, the M1903A4 continued to serve as a sniper weapon in Korea and even into the early years of Vietnam. Some Marine marksmen carried customized O3s with higher-powered inertial scopes, pushing their shots to 1,000 yards and beyond. Long after newer rifles appeared, the old Springfield remained a measure of what a true precision weapon should be: accurate, dependable, and utterly honest. In museums today, the M1903A4 sits behind glass, its wood darkened by time, its scope dim but unbroken. Visitors walk past, unaware that this simple bolt-action rifle once shaped the psychology of modern war. They see a relic, but to those who know, it's something more. Every scratch on its stock tells a story of Normandy hedgerows, of volcanic ridges on Iwo Jima, of a quiet man in a ghillie suit, watching through a scope, waiting for the wind to fall still. The legend of the Springfield lives on not because it fired the fastest or carried the most rounds, but because it proved a truth that still defines warfare, that precision and patience will always conquer chaos. The Germans had machines, the Japanese had courage, but the Americans had something neither expected: a rifle that could make one man's eye more powerful than a machine gun. At the Springfield Armory Museum, there is a small inscription beside one of the surviving 1903A4 rifles. It reads, "Effective range 800 yards. Actual range, the limits of patience." That line captures everything. The M1903 wasn't just a weapon of distance, it was a weapon of discipline, a marriage between engineering and humanity. It made each soldier who carried it both scientist and artist, balancing wind, gravity, and instinct to create a single perfect moment. Even now, when snipers hit targets at a mile using modern glass, composite stocks, and digital rangefinders, they owe a silent debt to that first American rifle that taught the world what true precision meant. And somewhere, in the collective memory of those who fought and those who fell, the echo remains: one clean shot cutting through the stillness, followed by nothing at all. The work of the Springfield was always finished in silence.